Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. Wow, this past weekend that ended on June 16th, 2024, was the best weekend at the box office so far this year, thanks to the opening of Disney's animated movie Inside Out 2, which made $155 million domestically alone, and is by far the biggest opening weekend domestically for any movie so far this year, and nearly doubling the $82.5 million that Dune Part 2 earned domestically during its opening weekend. So when combined with the other four movies in the top 5 for this weekend's domestic box office, it has a cumulative box office total of $201.9 million, which is 133.6% higher than last weekend's similar total. But before proceeding, I'd like to ask everyone to please like this video, please share the video on social media, please subscribe to support this channel, and please press the bell to receive notifications. Thanks! And I'll once again first quickly go over the newest earnings for this year's 3 highest grossing movies so far for 2024. Currently in first place is Dune Part 2, which ended its theatrical run and earned a total of $282.1 million domestically and $429.6 million internationally for a global gross box office total of $711.8 million. It remains the only movie so far this year to surpass both $600 million and $700 million in global gross box office revenue, and is also the only movie so far this year to earn more than $200 million domestically, which is clearly going to change very soon. With a production budget of $190 million, when multiplied by 2.5 and 3.0 respectively to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, as well as the additional costs of marketing the movie and other miscellaneous costs that the studio pays above and beyond the production budget, we get an estimated break-even point range of $475 million to $570 million. Thus, Dune Part 2 most definitely made bank. The second highest grossing movie for 2024, both domestically and worldwide, remains Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire, which also appears to have ended its theatrical run. The movie earned $196.4 million domestically and $371.3 million internationally for a global gross box office total of around $567.7 million. It's one of only 3 movies so far this year that have surpassed $500 million at the global box office, and is the highest grossing movie worldwide for the Godzilla and King Kong movies that have been produced by Legendary Pictures and Warner Brothers. With its reported production budget of $135 million, when multiplied by 2.5 and 3.0 respectively, we get an estimated break-even point ranging from $337.5 million to $405 million. Thus, Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire also made bank. The third highest grossing movie so far this year, both domestically and globally, is Kung Fu Panda 4. The movie's domestic theatrical run ended with the movie earning $193.6 million, but it has earned another $666,000 internationally to bring its current international box office total up to $351.8 million for a current global gross box office total of $545.4 million, and is only the third movie so far this year to surpass $500 million at the global box office. The movie has a production budget of only $85 million, which, when multiplied by 2.5, we get an estimated mid-range break-even point of only $212.5 million. Thus, Kung Fu Panda 4 has also made bank. So this weekend's top 5 movies at the domestic box office included the following. Disney's animated movie Inside Out 2 was number 1. Sony and Columbia Pictures movie Bad Boys Ride or Die dropped to number 2. Surprisingly, Disney and 20th Century Fox's sequel, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, rose to number 3. But Sony and Columbia Pictures' The Garfield Movie dropped to the number 4 position. And rounding out the top 5 was New Line Cinema's low-budget horror movie, The Watchers, which dropped to number 5. In terms of their box office earnings, Inside Out 2 opened by earning a whopping $155 million domestically and $140 million internationally for a global gross opening weekend of $295 million. Currently, it's already the 5th highest grossing movie domestically so far this year after only its first weekend in theaters. And it's just barely behind the fourth highest grossing movie domestically so far this year, which is Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Obviously, those rankings are going to change very soon. Bad Boys Ride or Die earned another $33 million to bring its current domestic box office total up to $112.2 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $53.8 million to bring its current international box office total up to $102.4 million. Thus, globally, the movie earned another $110 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $214.6 million. Domestically, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes earned another $5.2 million to bring its current domestic box office total up to $157.8 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $6.7 million to bring its current international box office total up to $216.7 million. So globally, the movie earned another $14.7 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $374.5 million, and remains only the fourth US-produced movie to break $300 million at the global box office so far this year. The Garfield movie earned another $5 million domestically to bring its current domestic box office total up to $78.5 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $15.1 million to bring its current international box office total up to $139.2 million. So globally, the movie earned another $25 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $217.7 million. The Watchers earned another $3.5 million domestically to bring its current domestic box office total up to $13.5 million, and another $4.9 million internationally to bring its current international box office total up to $9.6 million, for a global gross box office total of $23.1 million. So The Watchers has definitely made bank. I'm also tracking several other movies that are no longer in the top 5, and they include the following. In its fifth weekend at the box office is Paramount Pictures' animated/live-action fantasy comedy entitled If, that dropped to number 6. In its fourth weekend at the box office is Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga by Warner Brothers, that fell to number 7. In its seventh weekend at the box office, The Fall Guy by Universal Pictures dropped to number 8. In its 10th weekend at the box office is Alex Garland's dystopian action movie Civil War by A24. Challengers by MGM and Amazon Studios is still earning some money. And finally is Ghostbusters Frozen Empire by Sony and Columbia Pictures, which continues to earn a small amount of money. So as to these movies' earnings, domestically, the movie entitled If earned another $3.5 million to bring its current domestic box office total up to $100.9 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $5.4 million to bring its current international box office total up to $72.6 million. So globally, the movie earned another $12.8 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $173.5 million. Domestically, Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga earned another $2.4 million to bring its current domestic box office total up to $63.1 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $11.3 million to bring its current international box office total up to $97 million. Thus, globally, the movie earned another $15.7 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $160.1 million. Domestically, The Fall Guy earned another $1.5 million to bring its current domestic box office total up to $87.9 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $1.4 million to bring its current international box office total up to $81.9 million. So globally, the movie earned another $4.2 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $169.9 million. Domestically, Civil War earned another $36,000 to bring its current domestic box office total up to $68.7 million. But the movie earned no money internationally, so the current international box office total remains the same at $45.8 million. And when combined, the movie's current global gross box office total is $114.5 million. Domestically, Challengers earned another $155,000 to bring its current domestic box office total up to $49.9 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $2.3 million to bring its current international box office total up to $44.1 million. So, globally, the movie earned another $2.7 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $94 million. Domestically, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire earned another $58,000 to bring its current domestic box office total up to $113.2 million. Internationally, the movie earned only another $67,000, so its current international box office total remains around $88.2 million. So globally, the movie earned another $150,000 to bring its current global gross box office total up to $201.5 million. Now, to know whether these movies are going to break even or not, as well as how much money they might be losing, we need to look at their production budgets, which we can then multiply by 2.5 for a single mid-range estimated break-even point, or by both 2.5 and 3.0 for a broader estimated break-even point range. For Inside Out 2, with its reported very high production budget of $200 million, that yields an estimated break-even point range of $500 million to $600 million. For Bad Boys Ride or Die, with its reported high production budget of $100 million, that yields an estimated break-even point range of $250 million to $300 million. For the Garfield Movie, with its $60 million production budget, that yields an estimated break-even point range of $150 million to $180 million. For the movie entitled If, with its very high $110 million production budget, we get an estimated break-even point range of $275 million to $330 million. For Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, with its even higher $165 million production budget, we get an estimated break-even point range of $412.5 million to $495 million. For Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga, with its very bloated $168 million production budget, we get a very high estimated break-even point range of $420 million to $504 million, which is why the movie is a huge flop. For The Fall Guy, with its $125 million production budget, we get an estimated mid-range break-even point of $312.5 million. For Civil War, with its $50 million production budget, we get an estimated break-even point range of $125 million to $150 million. For Challengers, with its $55 million production budget, we get an estimated mid-range break-even point of $137.5 million. And finally, for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, with its high $100 million production budget, we get an estimated break-even point range of $250 million to $300 million. For the three movies that I am no longer calculating projections for, which include Civil War, Challengers, and Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, all three of them are losing money, and their current losses are as follows. For Civil War, its current losses range from $10.5 million to $35.5 million in global gross box office revenue. For Challengers, its current losses are around $43.5 million in global gross box office revenue. And for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, its current losses range from $48.5 million to $98.5 million in global gross box office revenue. And when we divide each of these movies' losses by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, we get the following losses for each of the studios. For Civil War, A24 stands to lose around $5.3 million to $17.8 million. For Challengers, MGM and Amazon Studios currently stand to lose around $21.8 million. And for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, Sony and Columbia Pictures currently stand to lose around $24.3 million to $49.3 million. And that brings us to the movies whose final domestic and global gross box office revenue I am currently projecting, which includes Inside Out 2, Bad Boys Ride or Die, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, The Garfield Movie, If, Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga, and The Fall Guy. For Inside Out 2, assuming a range of possible average weekly draws from 30 to 40%, I can project that the final domestic box office for the movie may range from $387.5 million at the low end, $442.7 million at the mid-range, and $515.8 million at the upper end. Thus, it's very likely that Inside Out 2 is not only going to become only the second movie so far this year to earn more than $200 million domestically, it will most likely break $300 million and quite possibly might break $400 million. So it's definitely going to be joining the highest grossing movies list and will probably become the highest grossing movie domestically so far for 2024. And with the movie's current domestic share of 52.54%, I can project that the final global gross box office revenue for the movie may range from $737.4 million at the low end, $842.5 million at the mid-range, and $981.7 million at the upper end. So I fully expect Inside Out 2 to outperform Dune Part 2 and become the highest grossing movie worldwide in about 4 weeks, and it has a very good chance of becoming 2024's first movie to break $800 million globally in around 6 weeks. It might also break $900 million globally, though that currently seems less likely, but I also can't currently rule out the possibility of it potentially becoming 2024's first movie to reach $1 billion. Right now, that's even less likely, but there is a small probability of that occurring, and obviously, the movie isn't going to have any problem breaking even, which may happen in around 2 weeks. For Bad Boys Ride or Die, assuming a range of possible average weekly drops from 30 to 40%, I can project that the final domestic box office for the movie may range from $195.8 million at the low end, $215.6 million at the mid-range, and $241.8 million at the upper end, which is a much higher projected range than last week's projection. And with the movie's current domestic share of 52.29%, I can project that the final global gross box office for the movie may range from $374.4 million at the low end, $412.3 million at the mid-range, and $462.4 million at the upper end, which is also a much higher projected range than last week's projection. So there is now a very high likelihood that Bad Boys Ride or Die is going to break even. Going back to Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, this is the fourth movie in the franchise's current form that has an average weekly drop of 34.71% and a standard deviation of 3.65% to create a range of possible average weekly drops from 31.06% to 38.36%. And using that range, I can project that the final domestic box office earnings for the movie may range from $170.6 million at the low end, $172.8 million at the mid-range, and $175.4 million at the upper end, which is slightly higher than last week's projection. And using the movie's current domestic share of 42.14%, which is higher than last week's and still more than 2 standard deviations above the franchise's average domestic share, I can project that the movie's final global gross box office earnings may range from $405 million at the low end, $410.1 million at the mid-range, and $416.2 million at the upper end, which is a slightly higher projection than last week and slightly raises the possibility of the movie being able to marginally break even. So based on this week's projections and the movie's estimated break-even point range, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes currently stands to lose anywhere from $0 to $90 million in global gross box office revenue, which, when divided by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, means that Disney and 20th Century Fox stand to potentially lose somewhere on the order of $0 to $45 million. Now, as for the Garfield movie, the movie broke even as of last weekend and is continuing to make bank. By assuming a range of possible average weekly drops from 30 to 40%, I can project that the final domestic box office for the movie may range from $93.4 million at the low end, $96.9 million at the mid-range, and $101.5 million at the upper end, which is a more narrow range than last week's projection. And using the movie's current domestic share of 36.07%, which is slightly higher than last week's, I can project that the final global gross box office for the movie may range from $258.9 million at the low end, $268.6 million at the mid-range, and $281.4 million at the upper end, which is more narrow than last week's projection and further lowers the likelihood that the movie will be able to break $300 million worldwide. Going back to the movie that's entitled If, assuming a range of possible average weekly drops from 30 to 40%, I can project that the final domestic box office earnings for the movie may range from $112.2 million at the low end, $114.8 million at the mid-range, and $118.3 million at the upper end, which is a more narrow range than last week's projection. And using the movie's current domestic share of 58.16%, which is nearly the same as last week's, I can project that the movie's final global gross box office earnings may range from $192.9 million at the low end, $197.5 million at the mid-range, and $203.4 million at the upper end, which is a slightly lower range than last week's projection and remains well below the movie's estimated break-even point range of $275 million to $330 million. Thus, the movie continues to be a box office flop and may lose somewhere on the order of $71.6 million to $137.1 million in global gross box office revenue, which, when divided by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, means that Paramount Pictures currently stands to lose somewhere on the order of $35.8 million to $68.5 million. Going back to Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, assuming a range of possible average weekly drops from 30 to 40%, I can project that the final domestic box office earnings for the movie will probably range from $69.8 million at the low end, $71.4 million at the mid-range, and $73.5 million at the upper end, which is lower than last week's projection. And using the movie's current domestic share of 39.42%, which is lower than last week's, I can project that the movie's final global gross box office earnings will probably range from $177.1 million at the low end, $181.1 million at the mid-range, and $186.3 million at the upper end, which is a lower projection than last week. Thus, it's very unlikely that Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, will be able to break $200 million globally, and the movie remains a huge flop with potential losses ranging from $233.7 million to $326.9 million in global gross box office revenue, which, when divided by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, means that Warner Bros. Stands to lose somewhere on the order of $116.8 million to $163.5 million, which makes the movie the current biggest flop contender for 2024. And finally, going back to The Fall Guy, assuming a possible range of average weekly drops from 30 to 40%, I can project that its final domestic box office revenue may range from $92.2 million at the low end, $93.2 million at the mid-range, and $94.5 million at the upper end, which is a slightly lower range than last week's projection. And with its current domestic share of 51.75%, I can project that the movie's final global gross box office revenue may range from $178.2 million at the low end, $180.1 million at the mid-range, and $182.6 million at the upper end, which is lower than last week's projection. So with its estimated mid-range break-even point of $312.5 million, the movie is a flop and stands to lose somewhere on the order of $129.9 million to $134.3 million in global gross box office revenue, which, when divided by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, means that Universal Pictures stands to lose around $64.9 million to $67.1 million. Thus, Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, If, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, The Fall Guy, and Challengers all remain definite flops, but Civil War remains a probable flop, as does Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. But Inside Out 2 joins Bad Boys Ride or Die as having very good chances of breaking even, while the Garfield Movie, Dune Part 2, Godzilla x Kong the New Empire, and Kung Fu Panda 4 have all made bank. Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to everyone who has subscribed to our channel. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, and please feel free to share a comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, please press the red subscribe button, and please press the bell to receive notifications for new content. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.